I still remember the smell. It hits you before you even walk through the doors, sterile, artificial cleanliness, mixed with something else. Something rotting, something human. You get used to it after a while, or at least you tell yourself that you do. I never thought I'd end up working in a nursing home. It wasn't my plan. But like a lot of people, I needed a job and they were hiring. They're always hiring. The turnover rate is brutal. People either quit or burn out. Or they stay and become part of the problem. If you're lucky, you'll never have to see what I saw. Most people think of nursing homes as safe places. Warm, caring facilities where your parents or grandparents can live out their final years in comfort and dignity. I used to believe that too. I don't anymore. Because I know the truth. I know what happens when the doors close, when the visitors leave, when there are only a handful of us left to care for dozens of residents who can't care for themselves. I know what happens when the budget gets cut again, when we're told to do more with less, when we run out of supplies, when the aides are too exhausted to lift someone out of bed, when a resident falls and we're told to just document it, instead of calling an ambulance. I know what happens when a family calls to check on their loved one, and we smile through the phone, telling them everything is fine. I know how many of those calls are outright lies. But here's the worst part. The part that still haunts me. It's not just the system that's broken. It's the people. Because once you see enough suffering, once you hear enough residents crying out for help that will never come, something shifts inside you. You stop hearing it. You stop seeing them as people. You go numb because you have to. And that's when the real horror begins. Because once the staff stops caring, no one is left to protect them. And I promise you, nobody is protecting them. Not in the way you think. You might think your loved one is safe. That they're being taken care of. That someone is watching over them, making sure they're clean, fed, and treated with dignity. I wish that were true. I wish I could tell you that I was one of the good ones, that I fought against it, that I made a difference. But if I told you that, I'd be lying. I stayed. I kept quiet. And now, I have to live with what I saw. This is my confession. I didn't walk into this job expecting to be part of something ugly. I wanted to help people. I think most of us do, in the beginning. I remember my first day, the way the administrator gave me a big rehearsed smile and told me how rewarding this job would be. She walked me through the hallways like we were in some kind of luxury hotel, pointing out the freshly painted walls, the framed family photos on bedside tables, the schedule of daily activities meant to make it look like we were keeping the residents engaged. It looked nice, clean, professional. It was all for show. I learned that fast. The truth? These places know exactly what they're doing when they give you that polished first impression. It's for the families. They're the ones who sign the checks, after all. The residents? They have no say. The families see the brochures, the staged photos of smiling seniors playing bingo, the carefully worded promises about compassionate care and home-like environments. They see the cheerful receptionist, the administrator who shakes their hand and tells them how much we love our residents. What they don't see are the empty activity rooms, the games that never get played, the TV that stays on one channel all day because no one has time to change it. They don't see the way meals are rushed, how some residents don't get fed at all if they can't eat by themselves and there aren't enough hands to help them. They don't see how understaffed we are. Because that's the biggest lie of all. A place like this should have at least one aide for every 5 or 6 residents. That's what the regulations say. But we were lucky if we had one aide for every 15. On bad days, weekends, holidays, it could be 20 or more. You try getting 20 people up, dressed, cleaned, fed, and taken to the bathroom in a single shift. You can't. So you cut corners. You skip the showers. You tell yourself, I'll get to them tomorrow. You rush through diaper changes, you ignore the smell of urine because there's no time, and if someone presses their call button too many times, you turn it off. Not because you're cruel. Because if you stop to help them, that's 10 other people who won't get helped at all. This is what they don't tell you. Most of these places aren't about care. They're about profit. They charge families thousands, sometimes tens of thousands every month. But instead of using that money to hire enough staff, they cut costs at every opportunity. The administrator? The one who gave me that big smile? She made 6 figures. She had an office with leather chairs and framed certificates. She left at 5 every day. Meanwhile, the aides, the ones actually keeping people alive, they were making barely above minimum wage. No benefits. No sick days. Some of them worked double shifts just to afford rent. And when they got too exhausted to function, they quit. And were replaced by someone even newer, even more desperate, even less trained. And the residents? They suffered. Most of them couldn't complain. They had dementia, or they couldn't speak, or their families only visited once every few months, just long enough to take a staged photo and feel good about themselves. The ones who could complain? They were labeled difficult. Problem patients. The kind that get ignored because they make the job harder. I remember one woman, Mrs. Callahan. Tiny thing. Sharp mind, but her body was failing her. She used to be a teacher, I think. She had this little notebook she kept with her, where she wrote everything down. Notes about what time she ate, who came to check on her, what medications she was given. She was keeping track. She knew. She'd press her call button and wait. 10 minutes. 20. Sometimes an hour. And when we finally got there, she'd look me in the eye and say, "I wrote down how long it took." She thought that would make a difference. It didn't. One day, I heard the administrator telling a new hire that Callahan was a troublemaker, that she was confused and paranoid, that if her family ever asked questions, we should gently remind them that she's not always aware of what's real. She was perfectly aware. But in this place, truth doesn't matter. Perception does. As long as the families believe the illusion, as long as the checks keep clearing, as long as nobody looks too closely, nothing changes. And that's when I started to understand. This wasn't about care. It never was. It doesn't happen all at once. The way you stop seeing them as people. At first, you tell yourself you won't be like the others. You won't be the kind of worker who ignores a call button, who rushes through a meal without looking up, who forgets to say a kind word. You believe you'll care. And then the exhaustion sets in. 12-hour shifts, running from room to room, lifting bodies that feel like dead weight, pushing wheelchairs through hallways that always smell like bleach but never feel clean. The constant beeping of call lights, alarms going off when someone tries to stand up on their own, the muffled crying of residents left in their beds too long. You stop looking at them. Not because you don't care, but because if you start to see them as real people, it'll break you. And the system? It wants you to go numb. Because the moment you start questioning things, the moment you ask, why aren't there enough staff? Or, why did Mrs. Thomas have the same diaper on all day? You become a problem. I remember my first staff meeting. We were crammed into the tiny break room, the air thick with the smell of old coffee and cheap disinfectant. The administrator stood in front of us with her clipboard, talking in that same smooth, professional voice she used on visitors. "We need to work on efficiency," she said. "State is coming for an inspection next week. That means everyone needs to be on their best behavior." The nurses nodded. The aides kept quiet. We all knew what that meant. For the next few days, the place would look perfect. New sheets on every bed. Fresh flowers at the front desk. Extra staff brought in, temporary workers just for show. For 1 week, the call buttons would be answered faster, the residents would be fed on time, the medicine carts would be spotless. And then, as soon as the inspectors left, back to normal. And normal meant cutting corners. There's a trick they don't tell you about. A way nursing homes avoid getting in trouble. It's all in the paperwork. If a resident falls and gets hurt, don't call it a fall. Write it up as an unwitnessed incident. If a resident is losing weight because they're not being fed enough, document that they have a history of poor appetite. If bed sores start forming, say they were unavoidable due to medical conditions. It's all about phrasing. Families don't know the language. State inspectors don't dig deep enough. And the residents? They just suffer quietly. I once found a woman, Mrs. Patel, who had been left in the same position for so long that the sheets had stuck to her skin. She wasn't a difficult patient. She wasn't aggressive or loud. She was just quiet. The kind of person who didn't make a fuss, who didn't press the call button too much. And that's exactly why she was ignored. I remember peeling the sheets back and seeing the raw, red patches on her skin, the way she winced but didn't complain. She just looked up at me with tired eyes and said, "Thank you, dear." I wanted to cry. Instead, I told the nurse. She sighed, nodded, and wrote it down. "I'll put in a request for wound care," she said. I already knew what that meant. That request would sit on a desk for days, maybe weeks. By the time anyone did anything, it would be too late. And Mrs. Patel? She'd just become another name on the list of residents with inevitable skin breakdown. Because that's how they justify it. Old people die, right? They're frail. Their bodies break down. Families expect it. Nobody questions why it happens so much faster here. Nobody questions why so many of them are dehydrated, why their lips crack, why their skin turns paper thin. Nobody asks why they develop infections that go untreated until it's too late. Because death is expected in a place like this. And as long as it happens slowly enough, quietly enough, nobody gets in trouble. That's the real secret. These places don't kill people outright. They just let them die faster. And I still don't know which is worse. There are things you don't say out loud in a nursing home. No one tells you this directly, but you learn quickly. The longer you work here, the more you understand what's safe to mention and what you should just keep to yourself. For example, you don't talk about how often medications are missed. You don't mention how easy it is for someone to be given the wrong dosage, too much, too little, or sometimes none at all, because the nurses are stretched too thin, rushing from one cart to the next, checking off boxes on a chart without really looking at what's inside those little plastic cups. If a resident seems more confused than usual, if they suddenly stop talking, if they sleep all day and don't wake up for meals, that could be a medication error. Or maybe it's just easier for everyone if they stay asleep. Sedation is a quiet tool in places like this. No one will ever admit to it outright, but there's a reason some residents suddenly stop calling for help, stop trying to stand up, stop resisting when they're left in bed all day. Some families actually prefer it that way. They don't want to hear that their mother is up all night, wandering the halls, restless and afraid. They don't want to deal with the fact that their father gets aggressive, yelling at people who aren't there. So they sign the papers. And once the medications start, they rarely stop. It's not always malicious. Sometimes it's done with good intentions, because there really are cases where a little sedation helps. But when you work here long enough, you start to see the pattern. The difficult residents? The ones who press the call button too much, who try to get out of bed on their own, who scream at night because they don't know where they are. They quiet down. And they don't wake up as often anymore. But you don't talk about that. You also don't talk about the missing items. Because things disappear in places like this. Not just the little things, family photos, blankets, old trinkets from home. The valuable stuff, too. Rings, watches, even hearing aids and dentures. Sometimes it's the residents themselves who hide their things and forget where they put them. Other times, it's not. You'd be surprised how many staff members walk out of here with someone else's wedding ring in their pocket. Some of them get caught. A few years ago, a nurse's aide got fired for stealing cash from a resident's purse, but not before she had already taken hundreds. Another worker was caught pocketing jewelry from a woman who had just passed away. He said she wasn't gonna need it anymore. But most of the time, it's never noticed. Because who's going to say anything? Not the resident who can barely remember their own name. Not the family who assumes their loved one just misplaced it. And definitely not management, because they don't want the scandal. So you learn to ignore it. To look the other way. To pretend you don't notice when a new staff member suddenly has expensive earrings or a gold watch they didn't have before. That's just how it works here. And if you try to fight it, if you speak up, if you go to management and say, "Hey, I think something's not right," you'll be the next one out the door. Because there's another rule, one they do say out loud. If you don't like it here, you can leave. That's what they told me when I first started noticing things. When I first asked why we were so understaffed, why residents were left in bed all day, why no one ever followed up on those missing items. They don't fire you for asking questions. They just make your job miserable until you quit. They schedule you for double shifts back to back. They assign you the hardest patients, the ones who take the most time and energy, the ones nobody else wants to deal with. They deny your requests for time off, accidentally forget to process your paycheck correctly, ignore your complaints when you say you need help. And if that doesn't break you, they'll find a way to push you out. Write you up for minor things. Claim you didn't follow protocol, even when you did. Say a family member complained about you, even if they didn't. I've seen it happen more times than I can count. So you learn. You learn to stop asking, stop pushing, stop looking too closely at the things that don't sit right. You learn the rules. Because if you don't, you won't last long. There's a smell in every nursing home. No matter how much bleach and air freshener they use, it's always there, clinging to the walls, soaking into the fabric of every chair, every set of sheets, every uniform. It's not just old age. It's not just sickness. It's the smell of neglect. I remember the first time I realized just how deep it went. It was during a night shift. Those were the worst. Skeleton crew, barely enough staff to handle emergencies, let alone basic care. That night, I was covering 2 hallways by myself, responsible for more than 20 residents, most of whom couldn't even turn over in bed without help. I walked into one of the rooms, and the smell hit me before I even saw her. Mrs. Jensen. She had been lying in the same position for hours, soaked in urine, the bedsheets damp and yellow-stained. Her skin was red and irritated, the beginning of a bedsore forming on her hip. The worst part? She was awake. She looked at me, her cloudy eyes dull with exhaustion. She didn't even seem embarrassed anymore. Just tired. I pressed the button, she whispered. No one came. I checked the call light. It wasn't on. Someone had turned it off. This wasn't an accident. It happened all the time. If a resident was known to call for help too much, if they were too demanding, if the staff was overwhelmed and didn't want to deal with them, their call button would accidentally get turned off. That was the unspoken rule. The quiet ones wait the longest. The ones who scream and make a scene? They get attention, mostly because management doesn't want family members to complain. But the ones who stay silent, who try not to be a bother, they get ignored. And it doesn't take long before they stop asking for help at all. That's how the bedsores start. People think bedsores are just a side effect of being old and bedridden. They're not. They're a direct result of neglect. A person has to be left in the same position for hours, sometimes even a full day, for one to form. They start as red patches, like the skin has been rubbed raw. Then, if left untreated, the skin breaks down. I've seen them get so deep you could see the bone underneath. You can smell them before you see them. The scent of rotting flesh, of infection. And once they get that bad, they never really heal. I tried to do what I could for Mrs. Jensen that night. Changed her, cleaned her up, repositioned her as gently as possible. She winced, but didn't complain. She just whispered, "Thank you, dear," and closed her eyes. She was dead 2 months later. I don't know if it was the infection or something else, but I know she suffered. And I know nobody was held accountable. Because they never are. If a resident dies, management is relieved. One less body to take care of. One less person pressing the call button. They don't see it as a tragedy. They see it as a bed opening up for the next paying customer. It's just business. That's why they rush families through the admission process. You think placing a loved one in a nursing home would be a slow, careful process, right? That families would be given time to read everything, to understand exactly what kind of care they're signing up for? No. Most places want those papers signed fast. They know families are desperate, that they feel guilty, that they just want their loved one to be safe. So they push the paperwork in front of them, highlighting only the reassuring parts, 24/7 care. Nutritious meals. Engaging activities. What they don't highlight. The fine print. The part where it says the facility isn't responsible for injuries unless there's clear evidence of negligence. The part where it says medications can be adjusted at the discretion of the in-house doctor. The part where families give up their right to sue in most cases. I've seen so many family members break down crying in those offices, feeling like they're abandoning their parent, their spouse, their sibling. And the administrator just nods, speaks softly, reassures them that they're making the right choice. And once the paperwork is signed, that's it. They belong to us now. And most families? They don't visit as much as they think they will. I remember a woman, probably in her 50s, who came in sobbing when she admitted her mother. "I'll be here every day," she promised. "I won't let her feel alone." 2 months later, she was coming once a week. 6 months later, once a month. A year later, the visits stopped. That's how it happens. Life moves on. People get busy. They assume the nursing home is handling things. They don't see what I see. They don't see the residents who stop talking because they've been ignored too long. They don't see the ones who keep a packed bag by the door, convinced their family is coming to take them home soon. They don't see the ones who die alone, in rooms that smell like urine and sickness, staring at a door that never opens. And worst of all, they don't see how easy it is to forget someone once they're locked away behind these walls. Because that's the real horror of this place. Not just the neglect. Not just the suffering. But the fact that, in the end, they are forgotten. Most people think death is the worst thing that happens in a nursing home. It's not. The worst thing? It's when someone disappears and nobody even notices. I'm not talking about running away, though that happens too. I've had residents slip outside doors in nothing but a hospital gown, shuffling barefoot across the parking lot before security caught them. No, I mean something worse. I mean when a person, an entire human being, fades so completely that they stop existing in everyone's minds. And it happens fast. A resident gets sick. Maybe they get an infection. Maybe they fall. Maybe they just stop eating because no one is paying attention. They're taken to the hospital. And suddenly, their room is emptied out. Their belongings, clothes, blankets, little things their family brought to make the place feel like home, gone. Either boxed up for the family or thrown away if there's no one to claim them. The bed is stripped. The nightstand wiped down. Within an hour, it's like they were never there. And here's the thing. No one talks about them after that. You could work in this place for years and never hear what happened to half the people you cared for. Did they recover? Did they die? Did their family take them somewhere else? You don't know. Because as soon as they're gone, they stop existing in this place. A new resident moves into their room, and life keeps going. The only time you do hear about them is if the facility gets a call asking for their records. I remember one woman, Ms. Green. She had been here for over a year. Frail, but sharp. Used to be a librarian, always asked for books, but most of the time, we didn't have time to sit and read with her. She'd just hold them in her lap, running her fingers over the pages. One day, she was taken to the hospital for pneumonia. She never came back. No announcement. No update. Just gone. Her room was emptied by the end of the day. The next morning, someone else was in her bed. I asked about her once. The nurse shrugged. "I think she passed," she said, but she wasn't sure. Wasn't sure. A woman who lived here for over a year, who woke up in the same bed every morning, who ate 3 meals a day in the same cafeteria, who once had a life and a career and a family, was erased in a matter of hours. And nobody knew. Nobody asked. Because if we started asking, we'd have to care. And caring in a place like this? It's dangerous. You start caring and suddenly everything hits harder. The way some residents stare at the door every night, waiting for visitors who never come. The way some stop eating, stop talking, stop trying because they know nobody will notice if they give up. You start caring and suddenly you hear the cries at night. The way people call out for their mothers, for their children, for someone to help them, even though nobody will. You start caring and you start feeling guilty. Guilty that you can't do more. Guilty that you don't have time to hold their hand when they're scared. Guilty that some of them die alone, staring at the ceiling, not because their family abandoned them, but because nobody even told their family they were dying. That's another thing they don't tell you. Not every family gets a call in time. Sometimes it's because we're short-staffed and nobody thinks to check the emergency contact list. Sometimes it's because management doesn't want to bother with a death notification unless absolutely necessary. But I've seen it happen. A resident will take a turn for the worse, struggling to breathe, pulse weakening. We'll call the on-call nurse, who calls the doctor, who orders comfort care. And that's it. No rush to the hospital. No heroic measures. Just morphine, maybe some oxygen, and then waiting. Most of the time, it happens at night. And if the family wasn't visiting often, if they hadn't called in a while, they might not even find out until the next day. Or worse, until they come in for a visit and find the room empty. It's not intentional, not always. But in a place where death is routine, people slip through the cracks. And when that happens, you realize just how easy it is to be forgotten. That's what scares me the most. Not just that these places are understaffed. Not just that residents are neglected. But that at the end of it all, so many people die in these places, and nobody even remembers their names. There are things I've seen that I'll never forget. Things that still come back to me at night when I close my eyes. Things I can't say out loud to anyone who hasn't worked in a place like this, because they wouldn't believe me. Like how we sometimes have to cover up injuries to keep the state inspectors from shutting us down. It's not supposed to happen, of course. If a resident falls, if they get a bruise, if they show up with a broken bone that nobody can explain, it's supposed to be reported. Families are supposed to be told. The state is supposed to be notified. But that only happens if someone actually writes it down. If management decides it's a minor injury, they'll tell us to clean it up, cover it with a bandage, and not mention it in the charts. If a resident has a bruise on their arm from being grabbed too hard, we write down that their skin is fragile due to aging. If someone falls out of bed in the middle of the night and we find them on the floor, shaking, confused, we put them back in bed before anyone else sees. And if a family asks, "Why does my mother have a black eye?" we smile and say, "Oh, she must have bumped into something. You know how unsteady she is." Because the truth? Falls happen all the time. Most of these residents are in wheelchairs, but that doesn't mean they stop trying to stand. They forget they can't walk. They try to get up to use the bathroom on their own because no one came when they pressed the call button. And when they fall, they don't bounce back like younger people. One bad fall can be the beginning of the end. I've seen people go from talking, eating, laughing, to completely bedridden in a matter of days after a fall. Their bones are too fragile. Their bodies don't heal the way they used to. And if a broken hip means they can't get out of bed anymore, that means infections. That means pneumonia from lying flat too long. That means their muscles waste away. I once had a resident, Mr. Hawkins, a retired school principal. The kind of man who still tucked his shirt into his sweatpants every morning, even though he never left his room. He tried to get out of bed one night. No one knows why. Maybe he was confused. Maybe he was dreaming. Maybe he just didn't want to be trapped in bed anymore. He fell, broke his hip. The hospital sent him back to us a week later, but he wasn't the same. He didn't talk as much. Didn't ask for the newspaper anymore. Within a month, he was gone. Official cause of death? Complications from pneumonia. The real cause? Neglect. But we don't write that down. Because if we did, we'd have to admit what really happens in places like this. Nobody likes to admit it, but we restrain people here. Not in the obvious way, not in the way families imagine, with tied wrists and locked doors. That would be illegal. But there are ways. Have you ever noticed how some nursing home residents are always sitting in wheelchairs, even if they can walk? That's because it's easier to keep them still. If they can't walk, they can't wander. If they can't wander, they can't fall. If they can't fall, the facility won't get in trouble for preventable injuries. So instead of letting them move, we put them in wheelchairs, even if they still have the strength to walk. We dress it up by saying things like, "It's for their safety," or "They don't have good balance," even if they were walking just fine a few weeks ago. And once they stop using their legs, they lose the ability to walk altogether. I've seen it happen over and over again. A resident comes in, still moving, still shuffling down the hallways with a walker. Then one day, a nurse decides it's too risky for them to walk alone. So they're put in a wheelchair. And once they sit long enough, their muscles waste away. Within weeks, they can't walk anymore. It's a slow kind of restraint, one that looks harmless, one that nobody questions. But it works, because it keeps them easier to manage. There are some residents that nobody wants to deal with. You know who they are within your first week. They're the ones who throw things, who curse at staff, who spit and scream and refuse to eat. The ones who still have some fight left in them. And instead of figuring out why they're acting that way, instead of trying to make them feel safe, we call the doctor. And we get them medicated. It's always framed as helping them. They're just so anxious. They have dementia-related aggression. They need something to calm them down. And so, little by little, their medication increases. Until one day, they're not screaming anymore. They're not moving much either. They sit in their wheelchair, eyes half-lidded, staring at nothing. And everyone says, "See? Isn't that so much better?" No, it's not better. It's just easier. Easier for us. Because a silent resident is a manageable resident. And in a place like this, that's all that really matters. It took me a long time to admit that this place was changing me. At first, I told myself I was just getting used to the job, that I was learning how to cope. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was becoming one of them. The ones who stopped caring. The ones who walked past a crying resident without looking. The ones who turned off a call light and told themselves they'd go back later, knowing they probably wouldn't. The ones who made excuses every time something awful happened. And the worst part? I wasn't the only one. We were all drowning in it. The neglect. The exhaustion. The sheer hopelessness of it all. And the more you drown, the less you fight. I'll never forget the moment I realized I had gone numb. It was during a night shift. I was doing rounds, checking on the residents, making sure no one had fallen or wandered off. I walked into a room and found an old man, Mr. Delaney, sitting up in bed, staring at the wall. His sheets were soaked. His diaper had leaked hours ago. His skin was red, irritated, the early signs of another bedsore forming. And he was just sitting there, awake, silent, not even pressing the call button anymore. I knew what that meant. When residents stop asking for help, it means they've learned there's no point. I should have rushed to help him. Should have apologized, should have cleaned him up immediately. But instead, I just stood there. And for a single, horrifying second, I thought, at least he's not complaining. That thought hit me like a slap across the face. What was happening to me? I had started this job wanting to help people, wanting to make their last years easier, safer, more dignified. And now I was standing in a dark room, looking at a human being who had been left in his own filth for hours, and I wasn't even shocked anymore. That's how it happens. That's how you become part of the machine. You see so much suffering that your brain stops recognizing it as suffering. It just becomes normal. And when something becomes normal, you stop fighting it. That was the night I knew I couldn't do this anymore. Because if I stayed here much longer, I wasn't going to be able to leave. Not because they'd fire me. Not because I'd get stuck. But because one day, I'd wake up and realize I had fully accepted it. And I couldn't let that happen. That night, after I helped clean up Mr. Delaney, I started paying closer attention to how often we lied to families. It was worse than I thought. We didn't just ignore problems, we actively covered them up. We reassured families that their loved one was doing great, even when they were wasting away in a bed, too weak to lift a spoon. We told them their parent had been eating well, even if we had to throw away full trays of untouched food every night. We said, "She's in great spirits, even if she had been crying for hours, rocking herself in bed, whispering the names of people who never visited." We let families believe the illusion because it kept them from asking too many questions. I remember one woman, her name was Linda. Her father had been here for almost a year. She came to visit every weekend, brought him fresh clothes, made sure he had his favorite snacks. One day, she showed up and his wedding ring was missing. She panicked, asked every staff member if they had seen it. We all knew what had happened. It had been stolen. Probably by a staff member. But management didn't want a scandal. So they told her he must have misplaced it. That he had probably taken it off and forgotten where he put it. They told her they would keep an eye out, even though they knew it was gone forever. I watched her search his room for over an hour. Watched her get down on her hands and knees, checking under his bed, under his dresser, under the thin mattress. She was crying by the end of it. And when she left, management did nothing. No investigation. No real effort to find it. Because things go missing all the time in places like this. It's easier to pretend it never happened. Easier to let families believe the lie than admit how broken everything really is. And most of them do. Because the truth is too painful to face. That night, when I clocked out, I sat in my car for almost an hour, staring at the dark building, thinking about how many people were suffering in there right now. How many were lying awake in wet sheets, waiting for help that wouldn't come? How many were whispering the names of children who had stopped visiting? How many had already given up? And then I realized something even worse. One day, this could be me. One day, I could be the one in that bed. The one pressing the call button over and over again, wondering if anyone was coming. The one waiting at the window for a visitor who would never show up. The one dying alone in a dark room, without a single hand to hold. And that's when I knew. I had to get out. Before this place swallowed me whole. The day I quit, I expected to feel relieved. I thought walking out of that building for the last time would feel like escaping a prison, like stepping back into the real world where people weren't abandoned and forgotten. But that's not what happened. Instead, I felt guilty. Because I knew that inside those walls, nothing was going to change. The neglect would continue. The staff would remain overwhelmed. The residents would still cry out for help that would never come. And I was leaving them behind. I told myself I had no choice. That staying wouldn't make a difference. That I wasn't a hero, and I couldn't save them. But I still see their faces. Mr. Delaney, sitting in his soaked sheets, too tired to press the call button anymore. Mrs. Jensen, whispering, I pressed the button, as if she still believed someone would come. The silent ones. The forgotten ones. The ones who faded away without a single person fighting for them. And I think the worst part, the part one still can't shake, is that so many of them weren't even sick when they arrived. Most people think nursing homes are filled with dying people. That everyone who ends up there is already at the end of their life. That's not true. A lot of them could have had years left. But once you enter a place like this, it's only a matter of time. The system breaks you down. First, it weakens you, physically, mentally. You lose muscle from sitting too long, from being restrained in a wheelchair instead of encouraged to walk. You get used to lying in bed all day because nobody has the time to get you up. Then, it isolates you. Your world shrinks to 4 walls, to a single hallway, to the faces of overworked staff members who barely remember your name. And finally, it kills your will to live, because when you are ignored for long enough, when every need goes unmet, when the only thing you have left is waiting to die, you stop fighting. I saw it happen over and over again. And nobody ever questions it. Because people expect old people to die. It still shocks me how easy it is for these places to operate the way they do. How the same problems happen everywhere, and yet nobody does anything about it. And then I realized. It's because nobody wants to think about it. People don't want to hear that their mother is being neglected. That their father is sitting in a dark room, staring at the door, waiting for a visitor who will never come. They don't want to believe that they might have made a mistake by putting their loved one here. And worst of all, they don't want to face the fact that this could be their future, too. Because one day we will all be old. One day, we will all be at the mercy of a system that treats the elderly as a burden, not as human beings. One day, we will be the ones pressing the call button, hoping that someone will answer. And that's why nothing changes. Because as long as it's not happening to you, it's easy to look away. I still think about them. The ones who disappeared. The ones who wasted away. The ones who didn't have to die, but did anyway. And I think about who is sitting in those beds now. Because for every resident that fades away, another one takes their place. And the cycle continues. I tell myself that leaving was the right choice. That staying wouldn't have saved them. That I wasn't the villain, even if I was part of the machine. But I still wonder. How many of them died alone because we didn't have time? How many of them were ignored because we were told to cut corners? How many of them suffered in silence because nobody was listening? And how many of us will end up in their place one day, forgotten, ignored, and waiting for someone who will never come? I don't have an answer. But I know this. If you think this couldn't happen to your loved one, you're wrong. If you think this couldn't happen to you, You're dead wrong. I've been out of the nursing home industry for a while now, but the things I saw, they don't leave you. I still have nightmares about it. I still hear the voices of the residents I left behind, the ones who sat in silence, the ones who screamed for help, the ones who stopped trying because they knew no one was listening. And the worst part? This is still happening. Right now. Somewhere, as you're listening this, an elderly woman is lying in her own waste because there aren't enough staff members to change her. Somewhere, a lonely man is staring at the door, waiting for family members who promise to visit but never will. Somewhere, a resident is falling, hitting the cold floor, and lying there for hours before someone finally finds them. And nobody is talking about it. Nobody wants to. Because nursing homes are the final stop in life. Once you go in, society forgets about you. But we need to start talking. Because if we don't, nothing will ever change. The questions we should be asking. Why are these places so understaffed when families are paying thousands every month? Why are injuries covered up instead of reported? Why are residents being sedated instead of cared for? Why do so many families stop visiting after a few months? Why is there no real accountability for the suffering that happens behind these walls? And the most important question of all, if this was happening to your loved one, would you want to know? Because it probably is. And if it's not happening to them yet, it will. This is the reality of elderly care in this country. And if we don't start paying attention, if we don't start demanding better, then one day, it will be you lying in that bed, pressing the call button, wondering if anyone is coming. And by then, it'll be too late. Now it's your turn. If you've had a loved one in a nursing home, or if you've worked in one yourself, I want to hear your story. Have you seen neglect firsthand? Have you felt the guilt of leaving someone in a place like this? Have you tried to fight the system, only to realize it's too broken to fix? Drop your experiences in the comments. Because the more we talk about this, the harder it becomes for them to keep hiding it. And if you know someone who's considering putting their parent in a nursing home, share this with them. They deserve to know the truth before it's too late.